Welcome back, everyone. My name is Jenny Lorca, and I am a steering committee member for the Putting the Pieces Together conference, an event by and for people living with pain. I would like to thank the conference's sponsors, Pain BC, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research, the Chronic Pain Network, the Canadian Institutes for Health Research's Institute for Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, the Partnership for the Engagement of Patients in Pain Research, or the PEPPER Partnership, and Health Canada. Many of our presenters will share stories and perspectives shaped by their individual lived and situated experiences. These views expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Pain Canada or our sponsors. Remember that these sessions are being recorded and will be made available after the conference is over on Pain Canada's YouTube channel. So welcome to the second session for today, Gentle Movement, Befriending the Body. Please be reminded that today's session will be recorded, and we will have French interpretation and closed captions available to you. Merci to our translators. It is to my delight to get to welcome Kendra Copeland. Hi, Kendra. We are so grateful.
Hi, everyone.
We've been so grateful to have you here this week.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me back. I am going to just bring up my slides right away, and we'll just jump right into this. So again, my name is Kendra Copeland. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Coquitlam First Nations, which is colloquially known as Port Coquitlam in British Columbia. I'm a yoga grandmaster, and I studied in Tamil Nadu under Swami Vijayanand. And today I'm actually going to be teaching a little bit about how we can shift our relationship with our bodies through the lens of Tantric philosophy. So first thing to understand about these teachings is that they come from the non-dualist Tantric tradition. And when people hear Tantra, their minds usually jump to something like sensual. So I want to start by clearing up that, because we're actually going to explore how compassion and presence can help us meet chronic pain and limitation with dignity and reverence and care, both through story and contemplative practice. You'll likely want a journal or some sort of notebook handy, because we're going to do some contemplative practice at the end of our session today. So to clear up what Tantra is, traditionally speaking, Tantra is a collection of existential philosophies on the nature of consciousness. And they had a core understanding of collectivism opposed to individualism. Now, these practices originated in South Asia and also West Asia around the 6th century, and they're focused on liberation from suffering. These teachings were not attached to any singular religion or dogmatic practice, though religions did form out of these philosophies, and they can always be linked back to traditional teachers or lineages. However, in the West, they've often been depicted as hedonistic or idolatrous or esoteric or mystical. What most people in the West are more familiar with is Neo-Tantra, which has no lineage or connection to any sanctioned teacher. It was first popularized in the 1800s by the American Pierre Arnold Bernard, who is widely credited with making Tantra this kind of mystical sexual practice. It always attempts to make Tantra scientific, so it contributes to this idea that's held by many people that knowledge is only of value when it's scientifically based. And Neo-Tantra is often visually depicted. If we were to Google Tantra and see what comes up, we're going to see probably white heterosexual couples being physically intimate. And it sees Tantra through a lens which is rooted in white supremacy and Christian colonialism and British imperialism. So what am I actually teaching? I teach a practice that comes from the tradition called Kaula Tantra. And understanding the etymology of the words can actually help us understand what their meaning and purpose is. Kaula it doesn't really have an English translation, but it kind of roughly means a self-contained unit or unified interconnectedness. And Tan means to expand. Tra means to emit or release or liberate. So we can think of tantric practices as practices which are going to expand our awareness and liberate us from suffering and ignorance. And Kaula refers to how these practices drive us towards interconnectedness. And I use an image of bees here because they're very much that. They have their own kind of interconnected unit, unified, self-contained unit. They have their hive, but they're interconnected with everything. We depend on bees for the food that we eat. The flowers depend on bees for their pollination. So they're very much interconnected into a larger picture. Now, Tantric sages understood that not everyone's going to learn or process this information the same way. So over the centuries, they came up with many different ways to transmit this information. And that included theistic and non-theistic schools of thought, stories that were taught through oral tradition, esoteric artwork, ritual, sacred geometry, occult contraptions, tangible and intangible practices, and symbology. There's no one practice in Tantra because any of the practices can move you towards self-liberation. And Tantra offers a practice for any state you find yourself in. So even if you feel very closed off and contracted or open and receptive, the paths to self-liberation are virtually endless. And if one path doesn't resonate with you, you can drop it and go down a different path, which is why movement practices can be helpful, but they're not the only way that we can access yoga. And today, I'm actually going to start off by sharing some stories from the tradition, which is one of the ways that this information has been transmitted down the line. So first thing to remember is that Sanskrit is an Proto-Indo-European language, which means that it had 3 genders in its language: masculine, feminine, and neuter. So not unlike many European languages like French or Dutch. For example, we say un stylo in French, a masculine pen, and un crayon, please forgive my French, it's not very good, but a feminine pencil. And as such, early Indian philosophers, their philosophies are often heavily gendered. So words that end in A, that have an ah sound, for the most part were masculine, such as deva. And words ending in I, which have an E sound, were feminine, like Devi. So they mean the same thing, but we have a masculine variation and a feminine variation. In Tantric philosophy, our consciousness has 2 aspects. It's a singular consciousness, but it has 2 qualities. One being Shiva and the other being Shakti. This Shiva consciousness it represents the masculine aspect of a singular consciousness. It's pure awareness. It's the inner I amness. It's birthless, deathless. It's the abiding aspect of the divine. And without Shakti, it has no movement. It's inert. It's a penetrative quality. So it's an all-pervading aspect of your awareness. It's the part of you that watches what you do without intervening. The inner witness. So as an example, if you've ever seen an amazing sunset and it just stopped you in your tracks, or you've seen a breathtaking viewpoint in nature, then you're already probably quite familiar with this aspect because it's the part of you that's aware that you're taking it all in. It's aware that you feel the magic of it. It's that quiet awareness that observes without needing to fix or change anything. It just simply knows, I am here, I am watching, I'm aware. That's what's meant by Shiva consciousness. It's the part of you that notices I'm laughing when you're laughing. The part of you that senses your own heart swelling when you see someone you love. It doesn't judge, it doesn't interfere, it just witnesses. And this witnessing awareness is always present. It's steady, it's unchanging. Now, if Shiva is the still unchanging awareness that watches the sunset, then Shakti is the sunset itself, glowing, alive, fading, ever-changing. She is the pulse of experience, every wave of sensation, every flicker of emotion, every rise and fall of pleasure or pain. So if you think of a moment of pleasure, maybe you're savoring your favorite food or hearing a song that moves you and gives you chills. As you feel that rush of joy, there's also a subtle awareness that knows this feels good. And Shakti is the energy of pleasure itself, the warmth in the chest, the goosebumps on the skin, the fullness of being alive. And she's also pain. So if you imagine a moment of physical or even emotional pain, perhaps your heart aches after a loss, or your body tightens with stress. Shakti is present in that too. She's moving through the contraction, the physical aching, the tears. She represents the feminine aspect of consciousness. So any and all movements of energy, the physical world and universe, and everything that exists within it. She is innately creative and generative. She's a cycle of birth and death, of creation and destruction. And without Shiva, she exists as pure entropy. She's chaos. So she needs that aspect of the inner watcher to ground. But the main thing to remember here is that they're two aspects of the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. There's no hierarchy between them. They're equals and inseparable, which is why the Tantric sages often describe them as lovers in an embrace. Just as you cannot remove wetness from water or heat from fire, you cannot separate these two aspects of your consciousness. They are utterly united. And even though we perceive them as a duality, they are one. When we allow both pleasure and pain to move without the clinging or the rejection, when we let this inner awareness, this Shiva consciousness, simply witness the movement of energy, or as the sages would say, the dance of Shakti, something beautiful happens. The perceived separation between our awareness and our energy disappears and they merge into one. And this union is what we call yoga. It's the remembering that our consciousness and our experiences are not separate. They're two faces of the same reality. And in all of the stories, in all of the Tantric stories, the gods and the goddesses are aspects of this Shiva or Shakti. So they represent one of these two faces of consciousness. But of course, this is all theoretical. And the beautiful thing about Tantra is that it's best learned through direct experience. So let's actually take a moment and practice with this understanding. I want to invite you to find a comfortable position. You might close your eyes and allow your body to begin to relax. Take a moment to locate your breath. And the invitation here is to breathe with the awareness that you are breathing. As the breath comes in, I'm aware the breath is coming in. As the breath goes out, I'm aware the breath is going out. Fully aware of the breath. Now see if you can look into your own mind. Turn your attention back in on itself. Become aware of your own awareness. Can you see that there's this natural experience of simply being? A feeling of existing and being aware of your own existence. Notice how when you turn your attention back in on itself, there's this natural experience of being, of existing. You are, and you recognize that you are. And this natural recognition of existing and recognizing that you exist is echoing the fundamental self-reflection of consciousness. This is the pre-verbal I am. The natural experience of I am. Prior to words, prior to any ideas you have about yourself, you simply are. And it's not that you're experiencing yourself as I am masculine or I am feminine or I am a black person or a white person or I'm able-bodied or I am disabled. You're just experiencing yourself as existing and knowing you exist. I am. And this natural self-experience is the footprint within you of the primal consciousness, the Parampurusha or Shiva consciousness, as we say in yoga. The I is the Shiva. The emness is the Shakti, your capacity for self-experience. I am. And of course, this experience of being and being aware of your own beingness, of course, is not limited to gender. Anyone who has a desire to do so can turn their attention in on itself. And it can also be expanded to a collective awareness. We are, and we know that we are. In fact, the Tantric texts tell us that this larger body of consciousness is actually not separate from our own individual consciousness. So when you're ready, you might begin to open your eyes and maybe give your shoulders a bit of a roll as you make your way back into the space. But now that we have this kind of baseline understanding, I want to share with you this folklore that's going to mirror this experience. And it's the tale of the goddess Shakti in the form of Annapūrṇā, the goddess consort of Shiva. The word Annapūrṇā means filled with grain or food. And the story goes like this. For millennia, Shiva and his Shakti in the form of Parvati are happily wedded in union. But after a while, Shiva begins to criticize Parvati, and he begins to write off her worldly work of fertility and sustenance and nourishment as unimportant. For thousands of years, she smiles knowingly and just continues about her work. But one day, Shiva and Parvati get into an argument about the material world. Shiva wants to meditate and rest in his eternal state of non-being, simply witnessing. And like any wife on the weekend, the goddess has things to do. She wants to go to the market. She wants to get her groceries. She wants to clean the house. But annoyed by all of this, Shiva tells her, everything materialistic is just an illusion, including all of the food and the nourishment that they ate. This, of course, infuriates Parvati, who governs the materialistic and physical aspects of the universe. She is, after all, Shakti. So without a word, she leaves her home, withdrawing her half of the cosmic energy, which keeps the world turning, to let Shiva see how his meditation fares without her. With Parvati's disappearance, an eerie silence begins to encompass the whole world. But in his newfound silence, Shiva simply heads into meditation, the practice of observing without acting. Meanwhile, the world falls into peril. Without movement of Shakti, the world is deprived of food, and a famine occurs. Crops fail, all the cattle die off, and terrible scarcity ensues. Fighting among the people breaks out. There's great suffering, and soon Shiva's followers begin to disrupt his meditation to beg him for food. But he sends them away because the world is an illusion. Eventually, the demigods become hungry, and they too begin to arrive and disrupt Shiva from his meditations, begging for food. But he sends them away too. Finally, Shiva begins to feel the pang of hunger in his own belly, and by, the stomach pains disturb his meditation. And he too becomes consumed by the profound emptiness and yearning. That yearning becomes a bottomless pit. It's unbearable. So he decides to come out of meditation to find something to eat, only to find that the whole world is rotted away. He leaves his home to find his followers and gather food, but they're all gone. All the plant life has withered. There's no animals to hunt. There's no berries to gather. All of his followers have left for what is now modern-day Varanasi, where the last kitchen on earth is, and where food is still available. And as he despairs over the desolate earth, he decides to head to Varanasi to look for Parvati. So Shiva takes up his alms bowl, his begging bowl, and he heads to the great city to beg for food. And he gets into a long line at the food kitchen, and he is unsurprised when he reaches the front to find that the kitchen is owned by his wife Parvati, who's now taken the form of Annapūrṇā, goddess of the grain. Unable to watch her children suffer, she's taken up the form of Annapūrṇā, seated on a throne. Annapūrṇā happily serves and distributes food to the starving gods and the hungry inhabitants of the earth from her golden pot of infinite porridge. Word has spread of this hopeful and generous deity, and beings from everywhere have gathered in Varanasi to worship the goddess of food. And Shiva recognizes the goddess immediately, and suddenly comes to understand that without her too, he is nothing. His meditation, his self-recognition is actually sustained by the material world that he once wrote off as illusionary or inconvenient. And seeing his own ignorance, Shiva realizes that the importance of nourishment to his meditation, and he humbly holds out his alms bowl and begs for food from his wife. And she, of course, smiles and without hesitation feeds him. And as she fills his bowl with nourishment, fertility, sustenance pours back into the world, and all of the beings gather to eat together and sing her praises. And for this reason, the supreme deity, Shiva, is often depicted begging for a bowl of rice at the feet of Annapūrṇā. Now, the story of Annapūrṇā reinforces this tantric narrative, and it makes this clear. The material world is anything but an illusion, and it's only through the sustained material world that we can actually arrive home to this transcendental self. That as inconvenient and as painful as we sometimes experience the world and our own beingness within it, we actually require these experiences to know the unknowable aspects of the self. And actually, if we're attuned to them, those experiences can actually serve as a gateway into the self. You'll also notice in the story that she doesn't punish her consort Shiva either. Just as when we fall away from ourselves, or we feel unaligned, or we act out of integrity, oftentimes, especially if we're in pain, when we find our way back to ourselves, we can often meet ourselves with a feeling of self-compassion or self-love. So how do we take this teaching and put it into practice? I want to invite you to take your notebook out if you have one, or if you want to contemplate this, just in your own mind, that's okay too. But the invitation here is to consider that in the story, Annapūrṇā feeds Shiva to remind him that consciousness cannot exist without matter, that the sacred also lives in the body. And my invitation to you is to consider where in your own life can you soften your resistance to receiving nourishment or rest or love or care, especially when pain makes it difficult to feel worthy of it. Sometimes we have chronic pain, which means we have chronic needs or chronic dependence on other people, and we can develop a bit of a complex around that. So where in your own life could you stand to soften your own resistance to receiving? And I'll give folks a minute or two to think about that. You might tune into your own heart and just see what emerges, writing without worrying about grammar or having everything perfect, just letting the words flow. And even if you're not able to write in this moment, you might have more of a felt sense in your body. Maybe giving folks a few more seconds to finish any thoughts, knowing that you can always come back to this. And the second inquiry I would invite you to consider is when Shiva declares the world to be an illusion, Annapūrṇā responds by showing that the physical world, the act of feeding, is sacred. What happens when you see your body, even in its pain, as part of the sacred? And how might this shift your relationship with what you think is missing or broken? Oftentimes, when we experience chronic pain, I know for myself, we can see the body as a barrier or as a burden. And this is really an opportunity to reflect on how we might imagine the body as something sacred. It is, after all, the place where we've had our first kiss, the first time we've fallen in love, every hug you've had from a friend, every music piece you've ever danced to, or even just enjoyed listening to, every delicious meal you've ever eaten. All of these experiences have only occurred in the body. In fact, I can't know my sense of tenderness from anywhere else but this body. I can't know it from the couch or the family dog or any other object in the room. I only know it through this body. The last inquiry I'll invite you to consider is that there are times as someone living with chronic pain that, I'm limited in what I can pour into others. And that requires being okay with resting more or moving slower or doing less. Annapūrṇā's bowl is never empty because she gives from a place of fullness, not depletion. So what I would invite you to inquire is how you can honor both the part of you that gives and the part of you that needs to receive. What practices help you refill your bowl so that your giving comes from a place that is sustainable, whatever that looks like? So again, you might write down a couple notes that you come back to here and reflect on after our time together. But since we're honoring the body, I want to invite you to maybe check in and see, does your body want movement in any way? Is your body asking for anything? Maybe it's to roll the shoulders out. Maybe it wants to move the head in small circles. Maybe it's rotating the wrists or the ankles or giving the fingers a wiggle. Maybe you want to stand up and stretch. But just taking a moment to honor what your body is needing. And I want to leave you with this quote from Sonia Renee Taylor, who says, "Your body's not an apology. It is your home in the world. It deserves to be loved and respected in all of its magnificence." And this is really the fundamental teaching of Tantra, is that regardless of what is happening in our bodies, it is our home in the world. And it deserves to be respected. It deserves to be honored. So I'll pause that there. And again, thank you so much for having me in the space and sharing in these practices with all of you. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'll pass it back to Jenny.
Thank you, Kendra. Coming back, I feel extraordinarily tender and grateful. Thank you for bringing up Sonia Renee Taylor. I've been thinking about her words, "Your body is not an apology," all week. How can I continue to give this conference and receive from the steering committee? How can this conference sustain all of us, not just within the steering committee, but also, the with the facilitators, the speakers, yourself, the attendees. How can we all sustain each other when we're all pouring from various cups of fullness? Thank you. I'm going to pull myself in for a sec. Remember, everyone, that these sessions are recorded so that you can rewatch later and hopefully multiple times. We're going to take a break to return in about 15 minutes. I'm just going to give myself hugs all 15 minutes long. Please check the session schedule and visit the exhibitor area. Yeah. Where we continue to add resources generated from previous sessions. Our final session of the conference is Mapping the Future of Pain Research. And unlike most of the conferences, it's an interactive one. So I'm really excited for that for all of us. Please return in 15 minutes. It's 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern, 4 Atlantic, 4:30 Newfoundland. So see you soon and rest well and love yourselves. Yeah, thank you.